Close your eyes, relax, and drift into history. Welcome to another quiet journey through the past. Tonight, we travel to the gentle banks of the Nile, where the river moves without hurry beneath a sky filled with quiet stars. Long before great libraries gathered stories onto shelves, before roads stretched across distant kingdoms, before many famous names were ever carved into stone, there lived ordinary people whose days began with soft morning light and ended beneath the calm darkness of the Egyptian night. Their names were often forgotten. Their voices faded into the wind long ago. Yet their lives were just as real as those of the kings whose monuments still stand beneath the desert sun. Tonight, we spend our time with one of those ordinary people. A young farmer. His hands were rough from work. His sandals carried dust from narrow village paths. His life seemed small beside the temples and palaces of Egypt. But sometimes history quietly changes because one ordinary person simply notices something that everyone else has learned to ignore. Our story begins during one peaceful season when the Nile had already returned to its banks after the yearly flood. The fields were dark with fresh soil, soft beneath bare feet, waiting for another season of planting. The air still held the coolness that comes just before sunrise. Small cooking fires glowed inside mud brick homes. The smell of warm bread slowly drifted into the streets. Somewhere in the darkness, a donkey shifted its weight. Nearby, ducks floated quietly along a narrow irrigation canal where reeds bent gently in the morning breeze. The village itself rested against the edge of fertile land, where green fields slowly surrendered to the endless desert beyond. Its homes were simple. Walls of dried mud brick kept out much of the daytime heat. Flat roofs collected the evening breeze. Doorways stood open whenever the weather allowed, letting fresh air move through the rooms during long summer nights. Inside one small house, a young farmer named Hori slowly opened his eyes before the first rays of sunlight touched the horizon. He did not wake because of an alarm. No bells rang. No voices called. Years of routine had taught his body when the day should begin. For a few quiet moments he remained still upon a woven reed mat. The room around him rested in peaceful silence. His younger sister still slept nearby beneath a linen blanket. His mother had already risen. He could hear the gentle sound of grain being ground between heavy stones. Back and forth. Back and forth. The rhythm was slow. Steady. Almost comforting. Soon the smell of fresh barley filled the room. Hori sat up carefully, rubbing sleep from his eyes. His feet touched the cool packed earth floor. Outside, the sky slowly changed from deep blue to soft gray. The village was waking. Roosters called from distant yards. Goats shifted inside small pens. A neighbor quietly swept yesterday's dust from the entrance of her home. Nothing felt hurried. There would be many hours of work before the hottest part of the day arrived. There was no reason to rush toward it. Hori stepped outside carrying a small clay cup. The morning air felt cool against his face. He looked toward the Nile. Even from this distance, he could see sunlight beginning to touch the wide surface of the river. The water reflected pale gold. Small fishing boats already drifted across the calm current. The fishermen moved almost silently, lowering woven nets with practiced hands. They had performed these same movements countless mornings before. Some likely remembered learning from fathers who had learned from grandfathers before them. Ancient Egypt was built not only by monuments. It was built by habits. By mornings like this one. By people who quietly repeated careful work every day. Hori drank cool water from his cup before helping his mother carry fresh bread outside. The loaves were small and round. Still warm. Steam escaped through tiny cracks in the crust. His sister joined them a few moments later, still sleepy, quietly wrapping herself in a simple linen shawl as she accepted her share of breakfast. No one spoke very much. Morning belonged to peaceful thoughts. The village itself seemed to understand that. Even conversations remained soft before the heat arrived. As the sun slowly climbed higher, Hori gathered his farming tools. A wooden hoe rested across one shoulder. A woven basket hung from the other. Its handles had been repaired many times. Nothing useful was wasted. Wood was valuable. Fiber took time to weave. Every object carried the memory of careful hands. Walking toward the fields, Hori greeted neighbors with quiet smiles. An elderly man slowly led 2 oxen along the dusty road. Children carried small clay jars toward the river. Women balanced baskets upon their heads with effortless grace. A scribe walked carefully through the village carrying rolled sheets of fresh papyrus protected inside a linen cloth. Each person followed familiar routines. Each knew where the day would carry them. The fields stretched across the land beside the Nile like long green blankets. Young shoots had already begun reaching upward from rich dark soil. Water shimmered inside narrow irrigation channels. Dragonflies schemed across the surface. Tiny frogs disappeared beneath floating reeds whenever footsteps approached. Hori stepped into the field and knelt beside the young plants. He examined each row carefully. Healthy roots. Moist soil. Strong growth. The flood had been generous this year. Many believed it would bring a good harvest. Still, farmers trusted their own eyes more than hopeful words. Every morning they inspected the earth. The land always spoke quietly. One only needed patience to understand it. The hours passed gently. The sun climbed higher. Birdsong slowly faded beneath growing warmth. Sweat gathered across Hori's forehead. His hands became dark with wet soil. He paused now and then to drink water stored inside a clay jar shaded beneath woven reeds. Nearby, other farmers worked in peaceful silence. Occasionally someone exchanged a few words. Most simply continued tending their rows. The sound of wooden tools moving through soft earth blended with distant birds and slow-moving water. By midday the heat settled heavily across the valley. Even the breeze seemed tired. Workers rested beneath small shelters built from reeds and palm branches. Lunch was simple. Bread. Onions. A few dates. Perhaps dried fish when fortune allowed. The meal required little conversation. Bodies welcomed stillness more than speech beneath the afternoon sun. Hori leaned against a bundle of reeds while watching shimmering air dance above the fields. The Nile continued its patient journey. It had flowed this way for longer than anyone could remember. Kings came and went. Families grew old. Children became grandparents. Still the river continued. Always moving. Always returning. An old farmer settled beside him. His beard had turned almost completely white. His shoulders curved from decades spent working the land. He chewed slowly before speaking. "When I was your age," he said quietly, "I believed the river belonged to us." Hori smiled. "And now?" The old man watched the water for a long moment. "Now I know we belong to the river." Neither spoke again for several minutes. There was nothing more to add. The truth rested comfortably between them like warm sunlight. When the hottest hours finally passed, work began once more. Shadows slowly lengthened. The earth cooled little by little. Birds returned. Children's laughter drifted from the village where chores had begun giving way to evening games. As Hori walked along one irrigation channel, he noticed something unusual. The water seemed lower than it should have been. Not much. Only enough that someone paying little attention might never notice. He crouched beside the narrow canal. Tiny cracks had appeared in one section of the packed earthen wall. Water escaped through them in thin, quiet streams before disappearing into dry ground beyond the fields. Hori pressed damp soil against the opening. The leak slowed. But only briefly. Moments later another thin stream appeared a short distance away. He frowned. The canal had survived many seasons. Small repairs happened every year. Yet something about these cracks felt different. The ground beneath his feet seemed softer than usual. He remained there longer than necessary, watching the gentle movement of water beneath the afternoon light. The canal did not look dangerous. Not yet. Most people walking past would have continued home without another thought. But Hori kept watching. The river rarely hurried. Perhaps wisdom meant learning to be just as patient. And so, while the village slowly prepared for another peaceful evening beside the Nile, the young farmer quietly knelt beside the ancient canal, listening to the almost silent sound of water finding its own hidden path through the earth. Hori remained beside the canal long after the other farmers had begun gathering their tools. The light had softened into the warm color that comes at the end of an Egyptian day, when the sun slowly lowers toward the western desert and every reed casts a long, gentle shadow across the water. The air no longer carried the sharp weight of afternoon heat. Instead, a quiet breeze drifted over the fields, bringing with it the cool scent of the Nile and the sweet smell of damp earth. He rested one hand upon the bank. The soil felt different here. Not dry. Not firm. It seemed almost hollow beneath his fingers, as though water had quietly been moving beneath the surface for many days without anyone noticing. Hori pressed again. A little more earth crumbled away. Only a small amount. Enough to let another thin stream of water escape. It slipped through the opening without making much sound, disappearing into the thirsty ground beyond the canal. He watched it for a long moment. Water always found a path. Even the smallest drop seemed patient. It never argued with the earth. It simply continued moving. The young farmer slowly stood and brushed the soil from his hands. There was little he could do alone before darkness arrived. Tomorrow, he decided, he would return early and look more carefully. Perhaps it was nothing more than an ordinary repair. Perhaps the canal keeper had already planned to fix it. The thought brought him some comfort. He lifted his wooden hoe across one shoulder and began walking home. The narrow path wound between green fields that shimmered softly beneath the evening light. Wheat moved gently in the breeze like the surface of quiet water. Date palms stood almost perfectly still, their long leaves whispering whenever the wind found them. Far ahead, smoke rose from cooking fires. Families were preparing the evening meal. Children chased one another along dusty paths, their laughter floating through the cooling air before fading into the sounds of goats returning to their pens. The village welcomed the end of another day without hurry. Doors remained open. Neighbors spoke softly across small courtyards. Someone sat beneath a palm tree weaving fresh baskets from strips of reed. Nearby, an old woman carefully repaired a fishing net while humming a tune so old that no one remembered who had first sung it. The melody drifted gently through the evening. It carried no urgency. Only peace. When Hori reached home, his mother was placing flat loaves of fresh bread onto a woven tray. Their small house glowed with the warm light of a simple oil lamp. Shadows moved slowly across the mud brick walls. His younger sister was grinding herbs with a smooth stone. The gentle scraping sound blended with the crackling fire beneath a clay cooking pot. "You're late," his mother said quietly. I stayed by the canal. She looked toward him with calm eyes. Was something wrong? I'm not sure. He washed the dust from his hands before sitting upon a woven mat. There are small cracks in one of the irrigation walls. His mother nodded slowly. The canal keeper should know. I'll tell him tomorrow. No one seemed alarmed. In Egypt, canals always needed care. Each flood left behind fresh soil. Each season brought new repairs. Life beside the Nile depended upon careful hands and patient work. After supper, the family stepped outside. Night arrived gently. The heat of the day faded into pleasant warmth. Above them, countless stars slowly appeared across the dark sky. Without bright city lights, the heavens seemed endless. The Milky Way stretched from one horizon to the other like a pale river flowing across the night. Hori leaned against the outer wall of the house. The village had grown wonderfully quiet. Only a few voices remained. Somewhere nearby, someone played a small reed flute. Its soft notes drifted through the darkness before fading into silence. A donkey shifted in its shelter. Crickets began their steady evening song. From far away came the peaceful sound of water moving through the great river. The Nile never truly slept. Even during the quietest hours, it continued its endless journey toward the northern sea. Hori wondered about the small leak again. He closed his eyes. He could almost hear the gentle trickle escaping beneath the canal wall. Tiny. Patient. Nearly invisible. He told himself not to worry until morning. The stars continued their slow path overhead. One by one, lamps inside the village disappeared. Families settled beneath linen blankets. Children drifted into dreams. The cool night breeze entered open doorways and crossed quiet rooms where tired workers rested after another day beneath the Egyptian sun. Soon Hori slept as well. Long before sunrise, while the stars still filled much of the sky, he opened his eyes once more. The village remained wrapped in silence. Only the earliest workers were awake. His mother had already begun preparing bread. The familiar sound of grinding grain greeted the new day. Outside, the eastern horizon showed only the faintest line of pale gray. Hori drank cool water, gathered his tools, and quietly left the village. Mist floated above the Nile. It was thin and delicate, almost like linen cloth spread across the water. Fishing boats appeared only as dark shapes moving silently through the dawn. Birds waited among the reeds. The first rays of sunlight had not yet reached them. Everything felt still. As he walked toward the fields, the cool sand pressed softly beneath his sandals. The earth held the night's remaining freshness. Soon the sun would warm it again. He reached the canal just as light began touching the eastern sky. At first everything appeared unchanged. The water flowed calmly. The reeds swayed gently. Dragonflies hovered above the surface. Then he looked closer. The crack had grown. Only a little. But enough that he noticed immediately. The damp patch beneath the bank had become wider. More soil had slipped away during the night. Hori crouched beside it once more. He carefully cleared away loose earth. His heart remained calm. There was no panic. Only curiosity. As more soil fell aside, he discovered a narrow hollow beneath the canal wall. Water had quietly carved a hidden tunnel. Most of the bank still looked strong from above. But beneath the surface, the current had slowly carried tiny grains of soil away, little by little, through countless days and nights. He had never seen anything quite like it. The outer wall appeared healthy. The inside was slowly disappearing. He looked both directions along the canal. No one else had arrived yet. The fields remained peaceful beneath the growing morning light. He stood and began walking quickly toward the village. Not running. There was no need. But his steps became longer. Dust rose gently behind his sandals. Near the edge of the village lived Mena, the canal keeper. His work was among the most important in the community. He knew every irrigation ditch, every small gate that guided water into the fields, every bank repaired after each flood. His face had grown deeply lined from many years beneath the Egyptian sun. When Hori reached his house, Mena was already feeding his donkey. The older man smiled. "You're early. I think you should see something." Mena listened without interrupting. When Hori finished describing the hollow beneath the canal, the older man tied a simple rope around his water jar and lifted it onto the donkey. "Show me." They walked together beneath the rising sun. Neither spoke much. Morning birds filled the silence with soft calls. The village slowly awakened behind them. When they reached the canal, Mena knelt exactly where Hori had been sitting. His weathered hands examined the damp soil. He removed a few loose pieces of earth. His expression remained thoughtful. Then he reached into the small opening. His arm disappeared farther than Hori expected. Much farther. When he withdrew it, the older man looked quietly across the fields. "You noticed this yesterday?" "Yes. I'm glad you did." He remained silent for another long moment. Finally he sighed. "The outside fooled me." Hori waited patiently. The bank looked healthy after the last repairs. Mena gently pressed another section of earth. It collapsed more easily than either of them expected. Not dramatically. Simply softly. As though the ground had become tired. The canal keeper nodded to himself. "There is more empty space beneath here than there should be." He stood slowly, brushing damp soil from his hands. "We'll need help." The village bell was never used for emergencies. Instead, messages traveled from person to person. Quietly. Naturally. Within an hour several farmers had arrived carrying baskets, wooden shovels, fresh clay, woven reeds, and heavy stones. No one complained about the extra work. They understood. Water belonged to everyone. If one field lost its supply, the entire village would eventually feel the loss. The men worked carefully. They removed loose soil. They searched for the hidden channel beneath the bank. Women carried fresh water for the workers. Older children gathered clay from the riverbank. Even small boys helped carry bundles of reeds no larger than their own arms. The work moved steadily. No one hurried. The canal deserved patience. By midday the hidden tunnel became visible. It stretched farther beneath the wall than anyone had imagined. The flowing water had quietly carved away the earth for many weeks. Perhaps even longer. From above, almost nothing had seemed unusual. Several older farmers exchanged thoughtful glances. One shook his head slowly. A little longer. He did not finish the sentence. He did not need to. Everyone understood. If the wall had collapsed during the next heavy flow of water, much of the canal could have emptied into the surrounding land. Fields nearest the break might have flooded. Others farther away might have received too little water. An entire season's careful planning could have been disturbed. Instead, they had found the weakness while there was still time to repair it. Mena looked toward Hori. "You have careful eyes." The young farmer lowered his head modestly. "I only noticed the water." The canal keeper smiled. "Many people see water." He gently placed one hand upon the repaired bank. Very few truly watch where it wishes to go. Above them, the warm Egyptian sun continued its slow journey across the quiet sky, while the Nile flowed peacefully beside the village, carrying with it the same calm rhythm that had guided generations before them, and would continue guiding generations still to come. The repair continued through the afternoon with the same quiet patience that shaped nearly every task in the village. No one shouted instructions across the fields. No one hurried the work. The canal had carried water for generations, and everyone understood that it deserved careful hands rather than quick ones. The sun climbed higher until the air shimmered above the dark soil. Heat settled over the valley like a heavy linen blanket. The workers slowed their movements, not because they wished to rest, but because the warmth itself asked them to move gently. Hori knelt beside Mena as they packed fresh clay into the hollow beneath the canal wall. The clay had been gathered from the edge of the Nile before sunrise while it was still cool beneath the feet of those who dug it. Mixed with damp earth and woven reeds, it formed a strong layer that could resist the quiet pressure of moving water. Mena pressed the mixture firmly into place with the flat side of a wooden tool. He did not strike it. He simply pushed. Again and again. The rhythm became steady. Push. Smooth. Press. Wait. Each motion blended with the soft sounds surrounding them. Water flowed nearby. Birds called from the reeds. An ox snorted in a distant field. Somewhere farther away, someone sang while planting young vegetables along another canal. The song drifted across the warm air before fading almost completely into silence. Ancient Egypt was rarely silent. Yet its sounds were gentle. Life moved with 1,000 quiet voices instead of one loud one. By midday the women from the village arrived carrying baskets filled with bread wrapped in clean linen cloth. There were onions with their sharp, familiar scent. Small bundles of fresh herbs. Dates gathered from nearby palms. A little dried fish carefully preserved with salt. Clay jars held cool water drawn from deep storage where the sunlight could not warm it. The workers gathered beneath the shade of several sycamore trees whose broad branches reached over the edge of the canal. The shade felt almost cool compared with the open fields. Everyone sat close together. No one spoke very much while eating. The work had made them pleasantly tired. Their hands carried the smell of wet clay. Their sandals were dusted white with dried soil. Hori leaned back against the rough trunk of the tree and looked toward the river. The Nile moved slowly beneath the afternoon light. Tiny waves touched the muddy shore with barely a sound. A fisherman guided his narrow boat toward the western bank. His net hung over one shoulder. Its fine cords sparkled with tiny drops of water. Farther downstream another boat carried bundles of papyrus reeds freshly cut from the marshes. The stalks lay neatly stacked inside the small vessel, ready to become baskets, sandals, rope, writing sheets, and countless other useful things. Nothing from the river was wasted. The Nile gave generously. The people learned to answer with gratitude rather than excess. An elderly farmer sitting nearby smiled as he watched the boats. "When I was a boy," he said quietly, "I believed every boat was traveling somewhere important." Hori listened. "And now?" The old man chuckled softly. "Now I know many are simply going home." Several workers smiled. It was a simple thought. Yet everyone understood it. For most people in Egypt, the greatest journey each day was not toward a palace or a temple. It was the familiar walk home at sunset. Back to family. Back to bread still warm from the oven. Back to the cool evening breeze drifting through an open doorway. Back to rest. When the meal was finished, everyone returned to work. The repaired section of canal slowly began to look whole again. Fresh clay covered the hidden hollow. Flat stones strengthened the outer edge. Bundles of reeds were pressed into place to help hold the soil together until it hardened beneath the sun. Mena examined every part carefully. He trusted experience more than appearances. Several times he removed clay that looked perfectly smooth simply because it did not feel quite right beneath his fingers. Years of working beside moving water had taught him that small mistakes rarely stayed small. The afternoon drifted quietly toward evening. The shadows lengthened across the fields. Farmers finished watering their crops and slowly closed the small wooden gates that directed water into each narrow channel. One by one the canals settled into their nighttime flow. The river itself remained calm. Its broad surface reflected the deepening colors of the sky. Hori helped carry the remaining baskets back toward the village. His shoulders felt pleasantly heavy. His hands ached. There was a quiet satisfaction that came from honest labor. It settled inside him as gently as the evening breeze. As they walked, Mena spoke again. "I have watched these canals for nearly 30 years. Hori nodded. "I know. But today you saw something I nearly missed." Hori lowered his eyes. "I only happened to notice." The older man shook his head. "There is no such thing as only noticing." He walked a few more steps before continuing. "Most people look without seeing." Dust rose softly around their sandals. "The earth speaks very quietly." Mena smiled to himself. "So does water." Those words remained with Hori long after the conversation ended. That evening the village seemed especially peaceful. Children played beside the open square where older women sorted lentils into clay bowls. The smell of baking bread floated through the cooling air. Smoke from cooking fires climbed slowly into the darkening sky before disappearing among the first stars. A potter sat outside his workshop turning a wheel with one bare foot. His hands shaped fresh clay into smooth water jars. The spinning wheel moved almost silently. Round and round. Each vessel rose slowly beneath his patient fingers. Nearby, a carpenter sanded the handle of a wooden hoe that would soon replace one broken during harvest. Tiny curls of cedar fell onto the ground. He paused now and then simply to feel the smoothness of the wood before working again. Across the narrow street, two sisters sat weaving linen upon a simple loom. Their fingers moved almost without thought. Back and forth. Back and forth. The soft tapping of the loom became another gentle sound joining the peaceful evening. No one seemed to hurry toward tomorrow. Each task belonged fully to today. Hori stopped beside the village well. Several neighbors were filling jars before night. An elderly woman greeted him with a warm smile. "I heard you helped save the canal." Hori looked slightly embarrassed. "We all repaired it?" She nodded. "Yes." She adjusted the water jar resting against her hip. "But someone had to see it first." Before he could answer, she continued walking toward her home. The conversation ended as quietly as it had begun. Praise was never spoken loudly here. Kind words were offered gently. They settled into the heart more deeply that way. After supper Hori walked alone toward the riverbank. The village slowly faded behind him. Its voices became softer. The path led through tall reeds that whispered whenever the evening breeze touched them. Tiny insects danced above the water. Frogs called from hidden places among the marsh grasses. The western horizon still glowed faintly where the sun had disappeared. The first stars reflected upon the surface of the Nile. Hori removed his sandals and sat near the edge of the water. The mud felt cool beneath his feet. He watched the slow current. It looked almost exactly as it had the evening before. Yet now he understood something new. The river could appear calm while quietly changing the world beneath its surface. The hidden tunnel beneath the canal had not formed in a single day. It had grown grain by grain, drop by drop, night after night. No one had noticed. Not because they were careless. Simply because life gave everyone so many things to watch. Fields, animals, children, weather, food, the passing seasons. A small change could easily remain unseen. He wondered how many other quiet changes were taking place all around the village. A tree growing one leaf at a time. A child becoming taller each season. A fisherman slowly repairing his oldest net. An old wall settling just a little deeper into the earth. History itself often moved that way. Not with great noise, but through countless ordinary moments gently joining together. The stars brightened overhead. The moon rose slowly above the eastern bank. Its pale light spread across the river like polished silver. Nearby, a family guided their small boat toward shore after an evening of fishing. Their voices drifted softly over the water. A father lifted woven baskets from the boat. His oldest daughter gathered the oars. A younger boy proudly carried the smallest basket, though it held only a few fish. Together they disappeared along the path toward the village. The scene lasted only a minute. Then the river became quiet again. Hori remained seated until the coolness of night deepened around him. Finally he returned home. Inside the small house his mother had already placed fresh water beside his sleeping mat. His sister was asleep beneath a light linen blanket. The oil lamp burned low. Its gentle flame painted slow-moving shadows upon the walls. Hori lay down. His muscles welcomed the rest. Outside, the sounds of the village gradually disappeared. One doorway closed. Then another. Dogs settled into silence. The last cooking fire faded into glowing embers. Only the Nile continued speaking through the darkness. Its voice never truly stopped. Before sleep claimed him, Hori thought once more of Mena's words. The earth speaks very quietly. So does water. He closed his eyes. Beyond the mud brick walls, the repaired canal rested beneath the stars. Fresh clay slowly dried in the cool night air. Water flowed gently through its proper path once again. Fields waited peacefully for another sunrise. Seeds rested beneath the dark soil. Palm leaves whispered overhead. And all across the valley, ordinary people drifted into deep, well-earned sleep, unaware that a young farmer's careful attention had quietly protected not only a stretch of earth beside a canal, but also the gentle rhythm of village life that would begin again with the first soft light of another ancient Egyptian morning. Long before the first hint of dawn reached the eastern horizon, the Nile was already awake. Its water moved with the same patient rhythm it had carried through countless generations. The current slipped quietly around clusters of reeds, brushed against worn wooden boats tied to simple docks, and continued its endless journey through the heart of Egypt. Above the river, the stars still shone brightly, reflected upon the dark surface as if another sky rested beneath the water. The village remained asleep. Inside the mud brick homes, families rested on woven reed mats covered with light linen blankets. The thick walls held onto the coolness gathered during the night. Small oil lamps had long since burned out, leaving only faint traces of smoke drifting toward the flat ceilings. Outside, the streets were empty. The dust that had filled the air during yesterday's work now rested peacefully upon the ground. A gentle breeze wandered through the narrow lanes, carrying with it the scent of river water mixed with damp soil and the faint sweetness of date palms. Hori opened his eyes before anyone called his name. His body had learned the quiet language of mornings. He listened for a moment. there was the familiar sound of his mother's grinding stone. Back and forth. Back and forth. The steady rhythm never seemed hurried. It had begun before sunrise nearly every day for as long as he could remember. The sound belonged to home itself. He rose quietly, careful not to wake his younger sister. His feet touched the cool packed earth floor. The room still held the darkness of night, though a thin line of pale blue had begun appearing beyond the doorway. Outside, the village slowly stretched awake. One rooster crowed from somewhere beyond the neighboring houses. Another answered from farther away. Soon several more joined in until their calls blended together across the sleeping fields. Nearby, a donkey shook its head, making the small bell around its neck ring softly. Hori stepped outside carrying a clay cup. He filled it from the household water jar. The water was wonderfully cool. He drank slowly while watching the eastern sky brighten little by little. The first birds began leaving their nests among the palm trees. Their wings caught the earliest light. Some flew toward the marshes. Others settled upon the edge of irrigation canals where insects gathered in the morning air. The day had not truly begun. It was quietly arriving. His mother handed him a warm piece of fresh bread. Steam escaped gently as he broke it apart. The smell filled the cool morning. Simple food often tasted best before a long day's work. Fresh bread. A few olives. Perhaps an onion. Sometimes a little goat's milk. The meal asked for nothing more. Hori thanked his mother with a small smile before gathering his tools. As he stepped onto the village road, he noticed that Mena was already walking toward the repaired canal. The older man carried no tools today. Only a walking staff polished smooth by many years of use. Hori caught up with him. "Good morning." Mena nodded. "I wanted to see how the repair rested through the night." They walked together without hurry. Morning mist still floated above the lower fields. Tiny drops of moisture rested upon reeds and grasses, sparkling whenever sunlight reached them. The air felt cool enough that neither man yet wished for shade. The repaired section of canal soon came into view. At first glance it appeared unchanged. The fresh clay had begun drying. The reeds held firmly in place. Water flowed gently against the strengthened bank before continuing into the waiting fields. Mena knelt slowly. His experienced hands touched the repaired earth. He remained there for several quiet moments. Then he smiled. "It is holding." Hori felt a small wave of relief. The older man gently tapped the hardened clay. "It will become stronger with each passing day." The canal continued carrying its precious water without losing a single drop through hidden cracks. Nearby, young wheat moved softly beneath the morning breeze. The plants seemed almost grateful. Water reached them exactly as it should. Nothing had interrupted the quiet rhythm of the fields. Several farmers arrived carrying hoes across their shoulders. Each paused beside the repaired bank. Some nodded with quiet approval. Others ran a hand across the fresh clay before continuing toward their own fields. There were few words. There did not need to be. The work spoke for itself. Soon the valley filled with the peaceful sounds of another working day. Wooden tools pressed into soft soil. Oxen slowly pulled simple plows through dark earth left rich by the Nile's yearly flood. Farmers called softly to one another across neighboring fields. The voices traveled easily through the still morning air. Children carried small baskets of seed from one family member to another. Their feet left tiny prints in the damp soil before the sun slowly dried them away. Life continued much as it always had. That, Hori realized, was exactly why the repair mattered. When something important was cared for in time, ordinary life could continue without interruption. Few people celebrated such quiet victories. Most simply enjoyed another peaceful day. As the morning passed, Hori worked among the young crops. He loosened compacted soil around delicate roots. He removed weeds before they could grow larger. He carefully checked each irrigation channel leading from the main canal. Now his eyes lingered a little longer upon the flowing water. Not from worry. From understanding. He had learned that the smallest changes deserve gentle attention. The canal spoke quietly. He wished to become someone who could always hear it. By late morning the warmth began spreading across the valley. The cool air disappeared. Heat rose from the ground. The scent of damp earth slowly gave way to the dry fragrance of sun-warmed dust. A group of fishermen walked along the riverbank carrying freshly mended nets. The nets had been repaired during the previous evening beneath lamplight. Each knot had been tied by hand. Patiently. Carefully. One missing knot could allow fish to escape. Small details mattered. Hori watched them disappear toward their waiting boats. He thought about how every person in the village depended upon someone else's careful work. The fishermen trusted the net maker. The farmers trusted the canal keeper. The potter trusted the man who gathered good clay. The baker trusted those who harvested grain. The scribe trusted those who made smooth papyrus. No one truly worked alone. Even the strongest person depended upon countless quiet hands. Around midday the village grew still beneath the heavy sun. The fields shimmered with warmth. Workers rested wherever shade could be found. Some sat beneath palm trees. Others gathered beneath simple shelters woven from reeds. Hori joined several older farmers beside a large sycamore. Its broad branches created a circle of welcome shade. Clay jars rested against the trunk, keeping drinking water surprisingly cool. One farmer slowly poured water into small cups. No one drank quickly. The coolness deserved to be enjoyed. An elderly woman arrived carrying woven baskets covered with linen cloth. Inside rested warm bread, dates, onions, and small cakes made from ground barley sweetened with a little honey. The meal was simple. Yet after hours beneath the Egyptian sun, it felt generous. As everyone ate, conversation wandered gently from one subject to another. Someone spoke about a neighbor's new donkey. Another wondered whether the coming flood might arrive a little earlier this year. One man remembered catching an enormous fish many years before. No one argued. No one tried to impress the others. Stories drifted as slowly as the breeze moving through the leaves overhead. Mena listened more than he spoke. Finally, one younger farmer asked him a question. "How many canals have you repaired?" The older man looked thoughtfully across the fields. "I stopped counting many seasons ago." "Were they all difficult?" Mena smiled. "No." He picked up a small piece of dried clay from the ground. "The hardest repairs are usually the ones nobody sees." The younger farmer looked puzzled. Mena turned the clay over in his fingers. "If people notice a broken canal, everyone comes to help." He pointed toward the repaired bank in the distance. "But if a problem is still hidden?" He paused for a moment. "Someone first has to notice." The group fell comfortably silent. Hori looked toward the canal once more. Sunlight shimmered upon its gentle surface. From where they sat, nothing seemed unusual. It looked peaceful. Strong. Complete. Only a few people knew how close a hidden weakness had come to growing larger. The afternoon slowly unfolded. The workers returned to their fields. Birds searched for insects along the edges of the water. A pair of white ibises stepped carefully through the shallows, each movement slow and graceful. Their reflections stretched across the calm surface of the canal. A turtle climbed onto a smooth stone warmed by the sun. It remained perfectly still for so long that it almost disappeared into the landscape itself. Hori smiled. Even the animals seemed to understand that life beside the Nile was rarely hurried. Toward evening he walked once more along the repaired bank. Not because anyone had asked him to. Simply because it now felt natural. The fresh clay had already begun blending with the older earth around it. Soon no visitor would know where the repair had been made. The canal would appear as though nothing had ever happened. Hori found quiet comfort in that thought. Sometimes the best work left almost no sign behind. It simply allowed tomorrow to arrive as peacefully as today. The evening breeze returned as the sun drifted lower. Its cool touch carried away much of the day's heat. Smoke rose from distant cooking fires. Children's laughter echoed gently from the village streets. The scent of baking bread floated once more across the valley. Another ordinary day was coming softly to its end. And beside the ancient Nile, where the water flowed with endless patience beneath the warm golden light, a young farmer continued walking slowly along the canals, his eyes open to the quiet stories hidden within the earth, learning that history was often protected not by grand acts, but by gentle attention given to the smallest and most ordinary things. The next morning arrived as gently as all the mornings before it. The eastern sky slowly brightened from deep blue to pale gray, and then to a soft wash of gold. The stars quietly disappeared one by one, as though they were slipping behind a distant curtain. A cool breeze wandered over the Nile before the warmth of the day could rise from the earth. The village greeted the morning without haste. A woman swept yesterday's dust from the doorway of her home with a bundle of palm fibers. A boy carried fresh water from the river in a small clay jar, taking careful steps so that not a single drop would spill. An elderly man untied two patient oxen from their wooden post, gently rubbing each animal along its neck before leading them toward the fields. Nothing about these moments would ever be carved into temple walls. No royal scribe would record them. Yet mornings like these quietly held Egypt together. Hori stood outside his family's home for a few peaceful moments before beginning work. He enjoyed this small pause each day. The air still carried the coolness of night. The smell of warm bread drifted from several nearby homes. Palm leaves rustled softly overhead. Somewhere beyond the houses, ducks called from the riverbank. The village was waking one gentle sound at a time. His mother stepped outside carrying a woven basket. Inside rested several small loaves wrapped in clean linen. "You'll be working far from home today," she said softly. "I thought you should have enough." Hori accepted the basket with both hands. "Thank you." She smiled. "There will always be bread while there is grain." He looked toward the fields. "And there will always be grain while the water keeps flowing." His mother nodded quietly. She understood exactly what he meant. As Hori walked toward the river, he noticed something he had rarely paid much attention to before. The paths themselves told stories. Thousands upon thousands of footsteps had shaped them over generations. Some paths curved gently around old trees that had stood there longer than anyone could remember. Others followed the edges of canals built by hands now long forgotten. The ground remembered every traveler. Even when names disappeared, the paths remained. Near the landing where fishing boats rested overnight, several fishermen were already preparing for another day upon the Nile. One older fisherman sat upon an overturned basket, carefully examining his net. He held each section close to his face. If he found even the smallest broken strand, he repaired it immediately. His fingers moved with calm confidence. Thread passed through thread. Not followed not. The repair became nearly invisible. Hori paused for a moment. The fisherman noticed him watching. "Annette speaks quietly," the old man said with a gentle smile. Hori smiled in return. "So does a canal." The fisherman laughed softly. "It seems Mena has been teaching you." "He has." The fisherman nodded with approval. "Good." He returned to his work. Every craft has its own language. Those simple words stayed with Hori as he continued walking. Perhaps every part of village life truly did have its own quiet voice. The baker listened to the fire. The potter listened to the clay. The shepherd listened to the flock. The carpenter listened to the grain of the wood. The healer listened to the breathing of the sick. And the farmer listened to water and soil. None of these voices shouted. They whispered. Only patient people could hear them well. The morning passed peacefully. Sunlight spread across the valley. Workers moved through the fields with slow, practiced motions. Water continued flowing through the repaired canal exactly as it should. Its surface reflected drifting clouds that appeared only briefly before dissolving into the bright blue sky. As Hori worked, he noticed several children walking beside the irrigation channels. Each carried a small basket. They were gathering bits of driftwood and fallen reeds that had floated into the canals during the night. One little girl carefully lifted a smooth piece of wood from the water. She held it up proudly. Her younger brother smiled. "It will help the fire." She nodded. "Mother says nothing useful should float away." Hori watched them continue along the canal. They searched carefully, never hurrying. Even children understood that useful things were worth noticing. Farther along the fields, an elderly woman was collecting herbs growing near the edge of the water. She knew exactly where each plant preferred to grow. Some liked damp soil. Others reached toward drier ground. She picked only what she needed. Enough for healing teas. Enough for cooking. Enough to dry for another season. She left the rest untouched. The land gave generously when treated with respect. By mid-morning the warmth grew stronger. The workers wiped sweat from their foreheads with simple linen cloths. The earth beneath their feet became warmer. Even the birds sought shade beneath reeds or palm branches during the hottest hours. Hori paused beside one of the smaller canals feeding his family's field. A tiny frog rested upon a flat stone near the water. It remained perfectly still. Only its bright eyes moved. A dragonfly hovered above the surface. Its wings shimmered in the sunlight so quickly that they almost disappeared. For several quiet moments nothing happened. The frog waited. The dragonfly drifted. Water flowed gently onward. Then, with surprising smoothness, the dragonfly moved away, and the frog settled once again into peaceful stillness. Life beside the Nile often rewarded patience. As the sun reached its highest point, work slowed. The entire valley seemed to breathe more deeply beneath the afternoon heat. Farmers gathered beneath whatever shade they could find. Some rested against baskets filled with tools. Others stretched comfortably upon woven mats spread beneath trees. Hori joined Mena beneath the familiar sycamore. The older man poured cool water into 2 clay cups. Neither spoke for several moments. The silence felt easy. Comfortable. Finally Mena looked toward the river. "When I first became canal keeper," he said quietly, "I believed my work was to guide water." Hori listened. "Now I know my work is really to care for people." The younger man looked at him. Mena smiled gently. "The water feeds the grain. The grain feeds the village. So if the water is cared for..." He allowed the thought to finish itself. The people are cared for. Hori nodded slowly. He had never thought of the work in quite that way. Mena picked up a small handful of dry soil. It slipped gently through his fingers back onto the ground. Most people never notice a good canal. They simply notice full bread baskets. A soft breeze passed through the leaves above them. The shade shifted slowly across the ground. Some workers nearby had already closed their eyes for a short afternoon rest. Others quietly mended sandals or sharpened wooden tools while enjoying the coolness beneath the tree. No one wasted these peaceful moments. Even resting was treated as part of the day's work. After the heat began to soften, everyone slowly returned to the fields. The afternoon sunlight carried a warmer color now. Long shadows stretched across the young crops. The breeze returned from the river, bringing relief after many hot hours. As Hori walked along the canal, he met an elderly scribe traveling between villages. The man carried several rolled sheets of papyrus inside a linen case. His reed pens rested neatly beside them. Dust covered his sandals from many days upon the road. He greeted Hori kindly. "How are the fields this season?" "They are healthy." "And the water?" "It is flowing well." The scribe smiled. "Then your village is fortunate." He looked toward the repaired canal without knowing its recent story. "A healthy canal is like good writing." Hori tilted his head slightly. The old man continued. "If one small line is forgotten." He gently tapped the rolled papyrus. "The meaning slowly changes." He bowed politely before continuing down the dusty road. Hori watched him disappear beyond the palms. Another quiet lesson. Another reminder that careful attention mattered everywhere. Whether writing words, mending nets, shaping clay, or guiding water. Toward evening the village slowly filled once more with familiar sounds. Women baked bread inside rounded clay ovens. The warm smell drifted through every street. Potters carried newly fired jars from their kilns. Children returned from gathering reeds along the marshes. Goats wandered home almost by themselves, knowing exactly where each family waited. Smoke rose gently into the calm evening air. The sky slowly turned from gold to amber, then to soft shades of purple and deep blue. The first stars quietly appeared. Hori stood once more beside the Nile. The river reflected the evening sky with perfect calm. He listened. The gentle splash of an oar. The whisper of reeds. The distant call of water birds returning to their nests. The soft murmur of families sharing the evening meal beyond the riverbank. All these sounds blended together until they became one peaceful rhythm. He realized that the village itself was much like the canal. Many small parts worked together. Each person carried a little responsibility. Each quiet task supported another. No single pair of hands could care for everything. But together, without noise or praise, they kept life moving as steadily as the Nile itself. The evening breeze cooled the last warmth from the day. Palm trees swayed gently beneath the growing moon. Oil lamps began glowing inside mud brick homes, one after another, like small stars settling upon the earth. And with calm steps, Hori turned away from the river and walked home along the familiar dusty path, grateful for another ordinary day in a village where even the smallest acts of care quietly protected the lives of everyone around him. The night passed gently over the village, and while the people slept, the Nile continued its quiet journey beneath the stars. Moonlight rested upon the broad river like a thin sheet of silver. Along the banks, tall reeds leaned together whenever the cool breeze wandered through them. Their soft whisper was one of the oldest sounds in Egypt, older than many temples, older than many cities, and far older than the lives of the people who listened to it. Small fish stirred beneath the surface. A turtle slipped silently into the water. Somewhere in the marshes, a night bird called once before becoming quiet again. Nothing hurried. The darkness itself seemed patient. Inside Hori's home, the last warmth from the cooking fire had faded. The clay oven now rested in silence after baking the family's evening bread. The woven baskets were stacked neatly against the wall. A small bundle of onions hung from a wooden peg beside several strings of dried herbs gathered during the previous season. Everything had its place. Life was easier when each object returned to the same corner at the end of the day. Hori slept soundly. His hands still carried the pleasant ache that followed honest work. Outside, the village drifted through the quiet hours together. No doors were locked. Neighbors trusted one another. The greatest treasure most families possessed was not gold or jewels. It was grain stored safely after harvest. It was healthy animals resting inside simple pens. It was clean water waiting inside cool clay jars. It was a roof that stayed dry during the rare rains. These ordinary blessings were enough. Long before sunrise, the eastern sky began changing once more. The stars faded slowly. The air held the fresh coolness that would disappear once the sun climbed above the horizon. Hori awoke just as he always did. He sat quietly for a moment before standing. The house remained peaceful. His mother had already begun preparing flour for another day's bread. The familiar sound of stone grinding grain filled the room. Back and forth. Back and forth. Each movement was slow and steady. The sound never seemed tiring. Instead, it became part of the rhythm of life itself. His younger sister stepped outside carrying a small basket. "I'm going to gather reeds," she said softly. Hori smiled. "Before the sun grows too warm." She nodded. "They are easier to cut while the morning is cool." He watched her disappear along the narrow path leading toward the marshes. Every member of the family had work to do. Even children learned useful skills little by little. Not through long lessons. Simply by helping every day. After breakfast, Hori walked toward the fields once again. Morning light spread across the valley. Mist floated low over the irrigation canals. The young crops glistened with tiny drops of moisture left behind by the cool night. A pair of white egrets stood perfectly still near the water's edge. Their reflections appeared almost as clear as the birds themselves. As Hori reached the repaired canal, he paused. The fresh clay had dried even more. Its color now blended naturally with the older bank surrounding it. Only someone who knew exactly where to look could find the place where the hidden tunnel had once been. He gently touched the firm earth. It felt strong. Reliable. Water flowed quietly beside it without escaping. He smiled to himself. Nearby, Mena was already inspecting another section farther upstream. The older man carried a simple wooden measuring rod marked with careful lines carved years before. Every few steps he stopped to measure the depth of the water. Then he wrote small marks upon a wax tablet. Hori walked toward him. "Good morning." Mena looked up with a smile. "Come." The young farmer joined him beside the canal. "I measure the water every few days," Mena explained. "The river changes little by little." Hori looked at the calm surface. "It seems almost the same." "It often does." The older man lowered the measuring rod into the canal. "But almost is not always enough." He lifted it again. The wet mark stopped just below one carved line. "The level is slightly lower than last week." Hori studied the rod. "I would never have noticed." Mena chuckled quietly. Neither would I when I was your age. The two continued walking together. Every canal, every gate, and every small branch leading toward the fields received the same careful attention. Sometimes Mena adjusted a wooden board by only the width of a finger. Sometimes he removed a handful of reeds caught against a narrow opening. Sometimes he did nothing at all. Simply looking was part of the work. The canal did not always need changing, but it always deserved watching. As the morning continued, more villagers arrived in the fields. A shepherd guided a small flock of goats toward higher ground where fresh grasses still grew. The animals walked calmly, stopping now and then to nibble at shrubs along the path. Their bells rang softly with each step. A potter passed by leading a donkey loaded with empty clay jars. He was traveling to a nearby village where fresh clay from another riverbank was known for making especially smooth pottery. The jars knocked gently against one another as the donkey walked. The sound echoed quietly across the fields. Farther away, several women harvested flax. Their careful hands pulled each plant from the soil with its roots intact. Later, the fibers would become fine linen. The linen would become clothing, blankets, sails, bandages. Many useful things began as simple green plants growing beside the Nile. Hori often found himself thinking about how connected everything seemed. The canals carried water. Water nourished plants. Plants fed people. People cared for canals. The circle quietly continued. No one stood outside it. Even the smallest child carrying drinking water helped keep the village alive. By late morning the warmth spread steadily across the valley. The scent of baking earth rose from the fields. Workers wiped dust from their arms. Birds sought shade beneath thick palm leaves. Only the dragonflies seemed to enjoy the growing heat. Their bright wings flashed above the canals as they darted back and forth chasing tiny insects. Hori spent much of the morning clearing small weeds from between rows of barley. The work required patience more than strength. He knelt upon the soft soil, gently loosening unwanted plants without disturbing the young grain beside them. His fingers moved carefully. One handful. Then another. The pace was slow. Yet by midday the field already looked cleaner. Sometimes progress was easiest to see after many quiet hours had passed. While he worked, an elderly farmer named Painasi approached carrying a wooden walking stick polished smooth from years of use. Painasi had farmed these lands longer than almost anyone else in the village. His face was deeply lined by sunlight. His shoulders bent slightly from decades spent harvesting grain. He stopped beside Hori. "You work carefully." Hori looked up. "I'm trying." Painasi nodded toward the weeds. "When I was young, I wanted to finish every field before sunset." He smiled gently. "Now I understand that the field teaches its own pace." Hori brushed loose soil from his hands. "What do you mean?" The old farmer looked across the valley. "You cannot ask barley to grow faster." He watched the breeze move through the green stalks. "You cannot ask water to hurry." His smile became even softer. "And you cannot rush yourself without making the work harder." For a long moment they both watched the fields. The barley swayed gently beneath the wind. No plant strained toward tomorrow. Each simply grew one day at a time. Painasi continued on his walk. His footsteps disappeared into the warm afternoon. Hori returned to his work with a calmer heart. The older man's words settled quietly inside him. He no longer counted how many rows remained. Instead, he gave his attention to the row before him. The work became lighter that way. As the sun reached its highest place, the workers gathered once again beneath the broad sycamore tree. Its deep shade welcomed everyone. Clay cups were filled with cool water. Fresh bread was shared. Someone passed around ripe figs gathered only that morning. Children laughed quietly nearby while chasing one another around the thick trunk of the tree. An old grandmother sat weaving a basket from fresh reeds. Her fingers moved almost without looking. Over. Under. Pull gently. Tighten. The basket slowly took shape. Several children gathered around her. One little boy asked, "How do you always know where the next reed goes?" She smiled without stopping her work. "My hands remember." The children watched closely. Perhaps one day their own hands would remember too. Hori smiled as he listened. He realized that much of village life was carried not in written words but in practiced hands. A baker's hands remembered dough. A fisherman's hands remembered knots. A potter's hands remembered clay. A farmer's hands remembered the feel of healthy soil. These quiet memories passed from one generation to the next, as naturally as the Nile carried water toward the sea. Above them, the afternoon breeze stirred the sycamore leaves, creating a gentle rustling sound that mingled with the murmur of conversation, the distant splash of oars upon the river, and the peaceful rhythm of another ordinary day unfolding beneath the endless Egyptian sky. The afternoon slowly stretched across the valley, and the great sycamore tree continued to offer its cool shade while the hottest hours quietly passed. Its wide branches had sheltered many generations before Hori was born. Children had climbed its lower limbs. Grandparents had rested against its broad trunk after long mornings in the fields. Travelers had paused beneath its leaves with dusty sandals and tired shoulders before continuing along the road that followed the Nile. The tree had watched seasons come and go without ever needing to hurry. A gentle breeze stirred the highest leaves. Sunlight filtered through them in shifting patterns, painting soft patches of light upon the ground. Some workers rested with their eyes closed. Others quietly repaired small tools while they waited for the heat to soften. One man sat sharpening the wooden teeth of a rake with a smooth stone. Tiny curls of wood fell into the dust beside him. Nearby, a young woman carefully stitched a worn linen sleeve with a bone needle and fine thread spun from flax. Her hands moved patiently, almost without thought. The village believed that useful things deserved another season whenever possible. A torn tunic became whole again. A cracked basket received fresh reeds. A broken sandal gained a new leather strap. Even a damaged clay jar might continue serving as a storage pot after its rim had been repaired. Nothing useful was abandoned too quickly. When the sun began its slow journey toward the western sky, the workers quietly rose. The afternoon breeze carried away some of the day's heavy warmth. The earth no longer seemed to shimmer. Birds returned from the shade and flew low across the canals, searching for insects dancing above the water. Hori stretched his shoulders before returning to the barley field. The plants had grown enough that they moved together whenever the wind passed through them. Watching them was almost like watching the Nile itself. Small waves rolled gently across the green rows. No two stalks moved in exactly the same way. Yet together they formed one peaceful rhythm. As he worked, Hori heard footsteps approaching along the narrow path. He looked up to see his younger sister carrying a woven basket filled with freshly cut reeds. Several long stems rested across her shoulder. She smiled when she saw him. "I found many this morning." "They look strong," Hori replied. She carefully lowered the basket onto the ground. "Mother says these will make good mats before winter." Hori picked up one of the reeds. It was smooth and firm. The green outer skin still held tiny drops of moisture from the marsh. "You chose well." She smiled proudly. "Our neighbor showed me how to look for the tallest ones." They stood quietly for a few moments beside the canal. The water moved gently past them. Dragonflies schemed across the surface with bright wings that caught the afternoon sunlight. His sister watched them. They never seemed to stop flying. Hori smiled. Perhaps they enjoy the breeze. She laughed softly. Or perhaps they are simply busy. The sound disappeared almost as quickly as it had come. Soon she lifted the basket once more and began walking home. Her footsteps left light marks in the dusty path. Hori watched until she disappeared among the palm trees. He thought about how every person in the village learned by watching someone older. His mother had learned to bake from her mother. The fisherman had learned the river from his father. Mena had once been a young helper walking beside an older canal keeper. Knowledge did not arrive all at once. It gathered quietly over many seasons. Late in the afternoon, Hori finished clearing the last section of weeds from the field. He stood slowly, brushing soil from his knees. His back felt pleasantly tired. The kind of tiredness that came from work completed with care. He carried his wooden hoe toward one of the irrigation channels and washed the blade. The muddy water slipped away in gentle swirls before joining the larger canal. Nothing remained still for very long beside the Nile. Water always continued onward. As he walked toward the village, he noticed smoke rising from several pottery kilns. The potters had spent the morning shaping fresh vessels from damp clay. Now the fires slowly hardened them. The kilns stood just beyond the houses where the smoke would not trouble the families. Their rounded shapes resembled small hills built from mud brick. The air nearby carried the warm scent of baked earth. Hori paused outside one workshop. Rows of newly finished jars stood cooling in the shade. Some were tall enough to store grain through the coming months. Others were small drinking cups. There were wide bowls for kneading bread dough. Narrow bottles for oils. Large water jars with rounded shoulders that helped keep water cool during the hottest days. The potter noticed Hori admiring the work. He smiled without stopping his task. A lump of wet clay turned slowly beneath his hands. Every jar begins looking almost the same, he said quietly. Hori watched the spinning wheel. But they end differently. The potter nodded. They discover their purpose little by little. He gently pressed one thumb inside the spinning clay. The walls rose higher. The shape became smoother. I cannot hurry the wheel. He dipped his fingers into water before continuing. If I push too quickly, the clay wobbled slightly. The whole vessel loses its balance. With gentle hands he steadied it once again. The spinning became smooth, round, even. The potter smiled. Clay enjoys patience. Hori thanked him before continuing toward home. He found himself noticing the same lesson appearing everywhere. The canal. The fields. The fishing nets. The woven baskets. The pottery. Each asked for calm attention rather than speed. Perhaps that was why life beside the Nile felt so peaceful. The river itself never rushed. As evening settled across the village, the road slowly filled with familiar sights. Farmers returned carrying wooden tools upon their shoulders. Women balanced baskets of vegetables gathered from small garden plots. Children walked beside their parents holding tiny bundles of herbs or reeds. Goats wandered calmly through open gates, already knowing where they belonged. The smell of supper drifted through the warm evening air. Fresh bread baked inside rounded ovens. Lentils simmered slowly in clay pots. Someone roasted onions over glowing coals. Nearby, the pleasant scent of coriander mixed with parsley floated from another household. The village gathered itself at the end of the day much as birds gathered upon the reeds before night. Each family returned to its own quiet place. After the evening meal, Hori offered to fetch fresh water before darkness settled completely. He lifted 2 empty clay jars and walked toward the river. The path had become wonderfully peaceful. Most of the day's work was finished. The only sounds were gentle ones. The chirping of crickets had begun. Frogs called from the marshes. Far away, someone played a simple tune upon a reed flute. The melody wandered through the evening air like a slow-moving breeze. At the riverbank, several neighbors were filling their own jars. Everyone waited patiently. No one pushed ahead. The Nile offered enough water for all. An elderly woman carefully lowered her jar into the river with the help of a rope. Hori stepped forward to help lift it. "It grows heavier every year," she said with a smile. He laughed softly. "Or perhaps the river grows stronger." She smiled. "I think I grow older." Together they carried the jar safely to the top of the bank. She thanked him before beginning the slow walk home. Hori filled his own jars. The cool water felt refreshing even through the thick clay. As he stood for a moment looking across the river, he noticed the changing colors of the sky. The last golden light had faded. Soft shades of rose slowly became violet. Then deep blue. The first stars quietly appeared above the eastern horizon. One by one they filled the heavens until the sky seemed endless. A fisherman guided his small boat toward shore. The oars entered the water without splashing. Each stroke was slow, measured. Behind him, gentle ripples spread across the river before fading once more into stillness. The village lamps began glowing. Small points of warm light appeared inside open doorways. Children's voices became quieter. Families gathered for the evening meal. The day's work settled gently into memory. Hori lifted the water jars and began walking home beneath the growing stars. The clay felt cool against his hands. The dusty road beneath his sandals was familiar. Palm trees stood dark against the evening sky. The warm breeze carried the comforting scent of baking bread, river water, and dry earth cooling after another long day beneath the Egyptian sun. As he reached the edge of the village, he glanced once more toward the repaired canal. In the soft moonlight it appeared as though it had always been whole. Water flowed peacefully through its ancient path, nourishing fields that stretched quietly into the night, while the steady rhythm of ordinary life continued just as it had for countless seasons, held together by careful hands, patient hearts, and the gentle, enduring gift of the Nile. The moon climbed higher over the Nile, and its pale light rested softly upon the quiet village. From above, the rows of mud-brick homes looked almost like part of the earth itself. Their flat roofs gathered the cool night air, and many families chose to sleep there during the warmest months of the year. Woven mats were spread carefully across the roofs, and light linen blankets rested beside them in case the breeze became cooler before dawn. The village breathed slowly. Somewhere a baby stirred for a moment before settling back into sleep. A dog lifted its head, listened to the distant sound of water, and curled up again beside a doorway. Palm leaves whispered overhead. Beyond the last houses, the dark fields stretched toward the river, where the canals reflected thin ribbons of moonlight. Hori slept peacefully beside his family. The day's work had left him pleasantly tired. His breathing was slow. His hands, still rough from the fields, rested quietly upon the woven mat. Dreams came gently after days filled with honest labor. There were no loud sounds to disturb the night. Only the endless conversation between the Nile and the wind. Hours passed almost unnoticed. Little by little, the stars drifted across the sky. Some appeared brighter than others. The oldest people in the village knew many of them by memory. They watched the heavens through every season, not only for beauty, but because the stars helped them understand the passing of time. The sky itself was another quiet companion. It changed slowly, faithfully, just like the river. Long before sunrise, the first hint of cool gray appeared along the eastern horizon. The moon began sinking toward the west. Tonight, the stars faded one after another until only the brightest remained. The ancient world, the village slowly awakened. Morning slowly touches. From one house came the familiar scraping sound of grain being ground between heavy stones. From another came the soft cough of an elderly man greeting the morning. A goat shook itself awake inside a small enclosure. The tiny bell hanging around its neck gave a gentle ring. Hori opened his eyes. For a moment he remained still, listening. Morning always seemed to arrive before anyone fully realized it. Darkness simply became lighter. Silence slowly welcomed new sounds. He rose, stretched his shoulders, and stepped outside. The air felt wonderfully cool against his face. He filled his lungs with the fresh scent of damp earth carried from the river. Mist floated low above the canals, making the fields appear almost dreamlike. A heron stood quietly among the reeds, watching the water with endless patience. It barely moved. Only its eyes followed the small fish swimming beneath the surface. Hori smiled. The bird understood something about waiting. After sharing a simple breakfast with his family, he walked once again toward the fields. This morning, however, he chose a different path. Instead of following the main road beside the canal, he wandered through a narrow footpath between small vegetable gardens. Each family tended a little patch of land close to home. Here grew onions, beans, cucumbers, herbs, and leafy greens. The gardens were modest. Yet they added fresh food to the family's table throughout much of the year. An elderly woman knelt beside one garden, carefully watering young plants with a small clay pitcher. She poured only enough water for each row. Not too much. Not too little. The earth accepted every drop. She noticed Hori watching. Young roots drink slowly, she said with a gentle smile. Hori nodded. They do. She touched the soil lightly with her fingers. If you flood them. She paused. They cannot breathe. Again, Hori heard another quiet lesson hidden inside ordinary work. Even kindness required balance. Too much could become as troublesome as too little. He thanked her before continuing. The path soon reached a cluster of date palms standing beside one of the older irrigation channels. Their trunks leaned slightly from many years of growing toward the sunlight. High above, bunches of ripening dates hung beneath the leaves. Not yet ready for harvest, but growing steadily each day. The ground beneath the palms remained pleasantly cool. Their shade welcomed travelers throughout the year. A merchant sat resting there with 2 donkeys. Large woven baskets were tied across the animals' backs. The baskets held pottery, linen cloth, dried herbs, and small carved wooden spoons that he hoped to trade in villages farther south. The merchant greeted Hori warmly. You rise early. So do you. The merchant laughed softly. The road belongs to those who begin before the sun grows hot. He offered one of the donkeys a handful of dried grass. The animal accepted it calmly. They enjoy traveling in the morning. Hori looked at the baskets. You have many things to carry. The merchant gently adjusted one of the ropes. Every village needs something different. He looked toward the distant fields. Some need grain. Some need pots. Some need cloth. He smiled. And sometimes they simply need news from another place. Hori found that thought comforting. Even before written messages traveled easily, stories moved with travelers. A harvest here. A new well there. A child born. A wedding celebrated. The Nile carried boats. The roads carried feet. Together they carried the lives of countless ordinary people. The merchant wished him a peaceful day before leading his donkeys onward. Their hooves made soft sounds against the dusty path. Soon they disappeared behind a grove of tamarisk trees. Hori continued toward the fields. The sun had now climbed above the eastern horizon. Golden light spread across the valley. The barley glowed softly. The canals reflected the bright morning sky. Everything seemed fresh once again. Work began quietly. Several neighboring farmers were already inspecting their crops. One man checked young bean plants growing beside his house. Another examined the leaves of several fig trees. Two brothers repaired a small wooden gate that directed water into one of the narrow irrigation channels. They worked together without speaking very much. Each already knew what the other intended to do. Years of shared work had taught them that. Nearby, Mena was kneeling beside another canal. Not because something was wrong. Simply because that was his habit. He ran his fingers gently through the flowing water. Then he looked along the bank. His eyes moved slowly. Patiently. Nothing escaped his attention. Hori approached him. Everything looks well. Mena smiled without standing. It does. He looked thoughtfully toward the repaired section farther downstream. That is exactly why we continue looking. Hori understood. Peaceful days were the best time to care for tomorrow. Waiting until trouble appeared made every task more difficult. The older man stood, brushing dust from his knees. When the canal is healthy. He looked toward the green fields. People hardly notice. His smile remained gentle. And that is a wonderful thing. Together they walked beside the water. Tiny fish darted among waving reeds. A kingfisher suddenly flashed across the canal like a streak of blue light before disappearing into the branches of a nearby tree. Its wings moved so quickly that they seemed almost invisible. For a few moments both men simply watched the place where it had landed. Nature offered many quiet surprises. None of them needed loud excitement. They were enough exactly as they were. As the morning continued, the valley slowly filled with familiar sounds once more. The steady splash of water entering small channels. The scrape of wooden hose through soft earth. The distant laughter of children helping gather vegetables. The gentle lowing of cattle grazing near the river. The flutter of pigeons lifting together from a nearby roof. Above everything rested the calm rhythm of the Nile itself. Its patient current flowed beside the village just as it had yesterday, and the day before, and for countless seasons stretching back beyond memory. Hori paused beside the repaired canal one more time. He looked carefully along the strengthened bank. The clay remained firm. The water flowed smoothly. The reeds swayed gently in the morning breeze. Nothing seemed remarkable. And perhaps, he thought, that was the greatest success of all. The quiet work completed only days before had already become part of the ordinary landscape. The fields received their water. The gardens continued growing. The bread would continue baking. Children would continue laughing along the dusty paths. Life would move forward with its gentle rhythm, almost unaware of the careful hands that had preserved it. With a peaceful heart, Hori lifted his wooden hoe once more and stepped into the rich dark soil, where another calm day of planting, tending, and quiet observation awaited beneath the warm Egyptian sun. The morning unfolded with its familiar, unhurried rhythm, and the village settled into another day beside the Nile as naturally as the river settled into its banks. The sun climbed a little higher. Golden light spread across the barley until every stalk seemed to glow. The coolness that had lingered since dawn slowly drifted away, replaced by the gentle warmth that always arrived before the stronger heat of midday. Hori worked quietly among the young grain. His wooden hoe moved through the soil with slow, practiced strokes. He loosened the earth around the roots, allowing water to sink more easily into the ground after each careful irrigation. The work was simple. There was nothing grand about it. Yet every handful of loosened soil helped the plants breathe. Every small effort quietly added itself to the coming harvest. Nearby, a pair of oxen pulled a wooden plow through another family's field. The animals moved without haste. Their broad shoulders rose and fell with each steady step. Behind them walked an older farmer whose weathered hands rested lightly upon the handles of the plow. He rarely spoke. Only now and then did he murmur a quiet word to the animals. They already understood the path. They had walked these fields through many growing seasons. Dust rose softly around their feet before settling again upon the earth. The smell of fresh soil drifted through the morning air. It carried a richness that always appeared after the yearly flood. The Nile had left behind another gift. Dark earth. Tiny fragments of distant mountains. Fine silt carried hundreds of miles by patient water. Every year the river quietly rebuilt the fields. Every year the people answered with gratitude and careful labor. Hori paused beside one of the irrigation channels. The water moved gently over small stones resting beneath its clear surface. Tiny fish darted between patches of waving reeds. A bright blue dragonfly landed upon a narrow stem. Its wings shimmered whenever sunlight touched them. For several moments it remained perfectly still. Then, without warning, it lifted into the air and disappeared downstream. The canal itself seemed peaceful. Its gentle current reflected drifting clouds that moved lazily across the bright sky. The repaired bank blended so naturally with the older earth that even Hori had to look carefully to find the place where the hidden weakness had once been. He felt a quiet satisfaction. Not pride. Simply gratitude. The land had accepted their work. As the morning continued, more people appeared along the dusty paths. A baker carried several baskets of fresh bread toward the larger homes where older villagers could no longer bake for themselves. The warm smell floated through the fields whenever the breeze shifted. The loaves were round and golden, their crusts lightly browned from the clay ovens. Nothing smelled quite like fresh bread in the cool hours of morning. Farther along the path, a young boy walked carefully with two clay jars balanced across a wooden carrying pole resting upon his shoulders. The jars swayed gently as he moved. His father walked beside him. Slowly, the older man said with a calm voice, "There is no hurry." The boy adjusted his steps. The jars became steadier. Not a single drop spilled. His father smiled. "Good." They continued together toward the gardens. Hori watched them disappear among the palms. So much of village life was learned through quiet encouragement. Few lessons came from long speeches. Most arrived through patient example. By the middle of the morning, the warmth became stronger. The scent of drying reeds drifted from the marshes. Palm leaves rustled gently overhead. The river breeze still carried enough coolness to make the work comfortable. Across the fields, women harvested bundles of papyrus growing along the water's edge. The tall green stalks were cut near their base with small copper blades. Each bundle was tied neatly with strips of linen before being carried toward the village. Some of the papyrus would become woven mats. Some would become baskets. The finest stalks would be carefully prepared for writing. Nothing from the plant would be wasted. Even the leftover fibers found useful purpose. An older craftsman sat beneath a palm tree trimming freshly cut reeds. His knife moved slowly along each stem, removing rough edges before placing the finished pieces into neat piles. Hori greeted him. The man returned the greeting with a gentle smile. "You've become friends with the canals," the craftsman said. Hori laughed quietly. "I think they have become my teachers." The older man nodded. "The best teachers speak softly." He lifted another reed. "You must listen closely." The sound of his knife continued. Slice. Turn. Slice again. Every movement was calm. Every cut was deliberate. The finished reeds would later become sleeping mats for several families preparing for the warmer months ahead. Hori continued toward the far edge of the fields where the land gently sloped toward a small marsh. The marsh was alive with quiet movement. Tall reeds swayed together. White flowers floated upon still pools of water. Tiny frogs rested upon broad green leaves. Birds moved carefully through the shallows, searching for insects hidden among the grasses. One elderly fisherman stood near the water with a woven fish trap resting beside him. Unlike a net, the trap required patience. He placed it carefully where the current moved slowly between clusters of reeds. Then he waited. Hori approached respectfully. "Will many fish come today?" The fisherman smiled. "Perhaps." He looked toward the water. "Perhaps only a few." He shrugged gently. "The river decides." There was no disappointment in his voice. Only acceptance. He had spent a lifetime beside the Nile. He understood that some days offered abundance. Others offered only enough. Both deserved gratitude. The two men stood together without speaking. The breeze stirred the reeds. A turtle climbed onto a fallen branch to warm itself beneath the growing sun. Tiny ripples spread across the marsh as a fish briefly touched the surface before disappearing again. The stillness itself felt comforting. After a while the fisherman quietly spoke again. "When I was young, waiting was difficult." Hori listened. "I wanted every trap to fill quickly." He smiled toward the water. "Now I know that waiting is simply another part of fishing." Hori nodded slowly. Perhaps waiting was part of farming too. Seeds waited beneath the soil. Trees waited through every season. Bread waited while dough slowly rose. Even the repaired canal had required patient hands instead of hurried ones. The village itself seemed built upon waiting. Not empty waiting. Hopeful waiting. The kind that trusted tomorrow. As the sun climbed toward its highest point, the marsh grew quieter. Many birds retreated into deeper shade. The fisherman lifted his trap. Inside were only 3 small fish. He smiled with complete contentment. Enough for supper. He gently placed them into a clay bowl lined with damp reeds. Nothing more needed to be said. Together they walked back toward the village. Their sandals left faint marks in the soft path before the breeze slowly covered them with fresh dust. Ahead, smoke had begun rising from cooking fires. Children's voices floated across the fields. Some were helping gather vegetables. Others chased one another between the houses before being gently called back to their morning chores. Life continued with its familiar rhythm. Near the village entrance, Hori saw Mena speaking with 2 younger workers. The canal keeper held his measuring rod beneath one arm while pointing toward a smaller irrigation ditch. The ditch was not damaged. It had simply collected fallen reeds carried downstream during the night. The 3 men worked together for only a few minutes. They removed the reeds. Water immediately flowed more freely into the neighboring field. The task was so small that most villagers never even noticed it. Yet the plants certainly would. One quiet act. One peaceful morning. Another ordinary kindness offered to the land. Mena looked toward Hori and smiled. It is often the little things. Hori returned the smile. They keep everything moving. The older man nodded. They always have. Together they stood for a moment, watching the clear water travel through its ancient path beneath the warm Egyptian sun, while around them the village carried on with its endless cycle of baking, weaving, planting, fishing, mending, and caring, each quiet task joining the next, until the whole valley seemed to breathe as one peaceful home beside the timeless Nile. By the time the sun reached its highest place in the sky, the valley seemed to slow its breathing. The morning breeze that had wandered so freely across the fields grew softer now. Warm air settled gently over the rich black soil, and the bright green barley shimmered beneath the light. Even the river seemed quieter during these hours, its surface smooth except for the occasional ripple left behind by a passing fish or the careful stroke of a distant oar. Hori wiped a little dust from his forehead with the edge of his linen sleeve. The work had been steady since sunrise. His shoulders felt pleasantly heavy. His hands carried the familiar mixture of damp earth and dry dust that every farmer knew well. He looked toward the sycamore tree standing beside the canal. Several workers were already making their way toward its wide circle of shade. No one needed to call them. The sun itself reminded everyone when it was time to rest. The great tree had become almost like another member of the village. Its branches stretched outward with quiet generosity, offering cool shelter without asking anything in return. The trunk was broad enough that 3 grown men could barely reach around it together. Its bark was rough beneath the hand, marked by many seasons of wind and sunlight. Roots disappeared deep into the earth where they quietly searched for moisture long hidden beneath the surface. Hori sat beneath the lowest branch and placed his wooden hoe beside him. Nearby, Mena lowered himself carefully onto a woven mat. The older man's knees no longer bent as easily as they once had. Years spent walking canals and kneeling beside riverbanks had left their gentle mark upon his body. Yet there was no complaint in his face. Only calm acceptance. One by one the other workers arrived. Some carried baskets. Others brought small clay cups. A young girl, perhaps no older than 10, carefully poured cool water into each cup before stepping back with a shy smile. Her father thanked her quietly. She nodded and returned home, carrying the empty water jar against her hip. The meal was simple, as it always was. Warm barley bread still wrapped in linen. Soft white cheese made from goat's milk. Fresh onions. A handful of dates whose sweetness seemed stronger after a morning of work. One family shared ripe figs gathered from a tree growing behind their house. Another offered a small dish of crushed herbs mixed with oil for dipping bread. No one counted whose food belonged to whom. Meals beneath the sycamore belonged to everyone. Hori tore a piece of bread and dipped it into the herbs. The flavor was fresh and gentle. He closed his eyes for a moment, enjoying the cool shade and the quiet company around him. The leaves overhead moved softly whenever the breeze found them. Their rustling blended with the distant sounds of the village. Somewhere a potter's wheel continued turning. A donkey brayed once before becoming quiet again. Farther away, children laughed while helping gather vegetables from the gardens. The sounds floated across the valley like small ripples across calm water. After several peaceful minutes, an elderly woman approached carrying a woven basket filled with flax fibers. She greeted everyone warmly before sitting beneath the edge of the tree. Without wasting a moment, she began spinning thread. A simple wooden spindle turned slowly between her fingers. Twist. Pull. Turn. Twist again. The loose fibers gradually became smooth thread. Several younger women watched her work while quietly talking together. One asked, "How long have you been spinning?" The older woman smiled without looking up. "So long that I cannot remember learning." The others laughed gently. "My mother taught me." She continued turning the spindle. "And her mother taught her." The thread became longer, stronger, even. When your hands repeat the same work for many years. She looked toward the young women. They begin remembering on their own. Hori listened while finishing his bread. He thought once again about all the hands in the village that carried memories. Hands that remembered weaving. Hands that remembered shaping clay. Hands that remembered planting seeds at exactly the right depth. Hands that remembered where each canal curved through the fields. Egypt was held together not only by stone temples or written records. It was also held together by hands that quietly remembered. When the meal ended, some workers stretched comfortably upon their mats for a short rest. Others continued small tasks that did not require standing beneath the hot sun. One young man repaired the leather strap of a sandal. An older farmer carefully polished the handle of his hoe with smooth river sand until the wood felt gentle against his palms. Nothing about these moments felt idle. Even resting had purpose. It allowed strength to return for the afternoon. The shade beneath the sycamore became wonderfully still. A pigeon landed upon one of the lower branches. Its feathers puffed slightly as it settled. Soon another joined it. The two birds sat quietly together, watching the people below with calm, curious eyes. A soft breeze stirred once more. The leaves answered with their familiar whisper. The sound reminded Hori of water moving gently through reeds. For a few peaceful moments it became difficult to tell where the tree ended and the river began. The valley seemed woven together by quiet sounds. When the strongest heat finally began to soften, the workers slowly returned to their fields. No one hurried to be first. There was still plenty of daylight remaining. Hori walked along one of the smaller irrigation channels leading toward a patch of young vegetables. The channel was narrow enough that he could step across it easily. Clear water flowed steadily between smooth banks lined with damp grass. He noticed a family of ducks paddling quietly along the shallow current. Several tiny ducklings followed closely behind their mother. Whenever she changed direction, they turned together almost at once. The smallest struggled slightly against the current but never fell far behind. Hori smiled. The little family disappeared beneath overhanging reeds, leaving only gentle ripples behind. At the edge of the vegetable gardens, he met an elderly gardener named Nebet. She was kneeling beside a row of cucumbers, gently brushing loose soil away from their stems. Unlike the larger fields, these gardens required attention almost every day. Each plant had its own needs. Some welcomed more water. Others preferred drier soil. Nebet seemed to know each one personally. She greeted Hori with a warm smile. "You have been spending much time with the canals." "I have." She looked toward the flowing water nearby. "They are good company." Hori laughed softly. "They never argue." "No." She smiled while lifting a small weed from the earth. "They simply teach." He watched her work. Her fingers moved slowly enough that she never disturbed the young roots beside the weed. The unwanted plant came free without harming anything around it. Nebet placed it into a small basket. "Every morning," she said quietly, "I walk through this garden before I begin. Even when nothing needs fixing. Especially then." She gently touched one broad cucumber leaf. If I only visit when there is trouble. She paused. I stopped noticing how healthy everything has become. Hori stood silently for a moment. The thought settled gently inside him. It was easy to look only for problems. Harder, perhaps, to notice quiet blessings that appeared every ordinary day. Healthy crops. Clear water. Strong walls. Good neighbors. Warm bread. These things often became invisible simply because they were always there. He thanked Nebet before continuing toward the fields. The afternoon light had changed. Its brightness had softened into a rich golden color that stretched long shadows across the valley. Palm trees reached dark fingers over the canals. The barley swayed gently beneath the returning breeze. Somewhere nearby, the steady tapping of a carpenter echoed through the warm air. Tap. Pause. Tap again. The sound was calm and measured. Each strike shaped another piece of wood that would soon become part of a cart, a door, or perhaps a new farming tool. Nothing in the village was made carelessly. Every object was expected to serve faithfully for many seasons. As Hori reached the repaired canal once more, he stopped without thinking. The bank had now dried completely. Grass had already begun growing across the edges of the fresh clay. Tiny roots reached into the strengthened earth, quietly helping hold everything together. Nature had already begun adding its own careful work to theirs. He knelt beside the water. Its surface reflected the late afternoon sky with perfect clarity. A leaf floated slowly past. Then another. The current carried them gently around a bend until they disappeared from sight. Hori watched for several moments longer. He realized he no longer came here because he feared another hidden weakness. He came because the canal had become a familiar friend. Its quiet voice reminded him to slow his steps. To notice small changes. To trust patient work. Around him, the village continued its peaceful rhythm. Bread baked inside warm clay ovens. Smoke drifted lazily upward through the evening air. Children gathered bundles of firewood before nightfall. Fishermen returned to the river with freshly mended nets resting across their shoulders. The potter's wheel turned steadily. The loom clacked softly inside an open doorway. The scent of warm bread mixed with fresh herbs and cool river water drifted across the fields. The day was gently leaning toward evening once more. And beneath the wide Egyptian sky, where the Nile continued its endless journey through fertile land and quiet villages, Hori rose from the canal bank and walked home at an easy pace, grateful that another ordinary day had unfolded exactly as it should, filled not with great triumphs or famous deeds, but with countless small acts of care that quietly held an entire community together. The evening settled over the Nile with the quiet certainty of countless evenings before it. The last warmth of the sun slowly faded from the mud brick walls of the village. Long shadows stretched across the fields where barley and wheat gently swayed in the cooling breeze. The irrigation canals carried their final reflections of golden light before the sky slowly deepened into shades of soft blue. Hori walked home along the familiar dusty path. His wooden hoe rested comfortably across one shoulder. His sandals carried the fine earth of the fields that had become part of his life since childhood. Behind him, the repaired canal flowed quietly, asking for nothing more than the same patient care it had always needed. Soon even the place where the hidden weakness had once rested became impossible to find. The fresh clay blended into the older earth. New grass reached across the strengthened bank. Reeds swayed gently beside the water. To anyone passing by, the canal simply appeared peaceful. Whole. As though it had never known anything different. And perhaps that is how the best acts of kindness often remain. They become invisible because life continues gently onward. The harvest came in its proper season. The grain ripened beneath the warm Egyptian sun. Families gathered together in the fields from the cool hours of morning until the golden evenings, cutting the tall stalks with careful hands that had learned the work through many generations. Bundles of grain stood in neat rows across the land. Children carried small sheaves almost as tall as themselves. Oxen pulled heavy sledges loaded with the season's reward. Dust rose softly around every step. Laughter drifted between neighboring fields. There was no great celebration for the canal. No monument was raised. No stone inscription carried Hori's name. The village simply continued living. Bread continued baking each morning. Fishing boats continued leaving before sunrise. Potters continued shaping damp clay into jars. Weavers continued guiding flax into fine linen. Scribes continued writing upon smooth sheets of papyrus. Children continued growing taller with each passing season. The quiet rhythm of ordinary life endured. And because it endured, it became the greatest reward of all. Years passed like gentle waves upon the Nile. Palm trees grew a little taller. Young children became skilled workers. The elders shared their wisdom beneath the broad branches of the old sycamore tree until, one by one, they rested from their labors, leaving their stories in the hands of those who remained. Hori himself became older. The strength in his shoulders slowly changed into patience within his heart. His hands grew more weathered. The lines beside his eyes deepened from years spent smiling beneath the bright Egyptian sky. Young farmers sometimes walked beside him along the canals. They asked simple questions. How do you know when the water is right? How do you tell if the soil is healthy? How do you notice what others miss? Hori rarely answered with long explanations. Instead, he invited them to walk more slowly. He encouraged them to touch the earth. To watch the river without speaking. To notice the reeds bending with the wind. To listen for the gentle sounds hidden beneath everyday life. The earth speaks quietly. So does water. The words that Mena had once spoken became Hori's own. And one day, many years later, another young farmer noticed a small change beside another canal. Only a tiny crack. Only the faintest trickle of escaping water. Most people walked past without seeing it. But one careful pair of eyes paused. One patient heart listened. One ordinary person chose to look a little longer. In that simple moment, quiet wisdom continued its journey from one generation to the next. Not through grand speeches. Not through books. But through attention. Through kindness. Through patient work shared beneath the same warm sun that had watched over Egypt for thousands of years. History often remembers kings. It remembers monuments reaching toward the sky. It remembers battles and great victories. Yet beneath those famous stories flowed another history. The quiet history of people whose names were never carved into stone. Farmers who rose before dawn. Mothers who baked bread while the stars still shone. Fishermen who trusted the river each morning. Potters whose hands remembered the shape of every vessel. Children carrying water with careful steps. Neighbors helping one another without expecting reward. Their lives became the steady heartbeat of ancient Egypt. Without them, no temple would have stood. No city would have flourished. No harvest would have filled the storehouses. The greatness of the ancient world rested upon ordinary days lived with extraordinary care. And perhaps that is why, after so many thousands of years, their quiet lives still feel close enough to imagine. The Nile continues to flow. The desert wind still moves across the ancient stones. Palm trees still whisper beside the river. The evening light still settles gently over the fertile fields. Somewhere, beneath layers of time, the path Hori once walked may still rest beneath the earth. The canal may long since have changed its course. The mud-brick homes may have returned to dust. The sycamore tree may have completed its own long journey through the centuries. Yet the gentle lessons remain. Notice the small things. Care for what is quietly important. Move with patience. Share your work with kindness. Find peace in simple routines. As night fully embraces the valley, the last cooking fires fade into glowing embers. The smell of warm bread lingers softly in the cooling air. Fishing boats rest quietly along the riverbank. Oxen sleep peacefully beneath the stars. The canals carry their calm waters through fields now wrapped in moonlight. Families settle beneath linen blankets. Children drift into gentle dreams. The voices of the village become softer and softer, until only the quiet murmur of the Nile remains. The river flows beneath a sky filled with countless stars. It has carried the stories of ordinary people for thousands of years. Tonight, it carries one more. A young farmer who simply noticed a little water where it should not have been. A careful pair of hands. A patient heart. A village that awoke each morning to the scent of fresh bread, the whisper of reeds, and the promise of another peaceful day beside the ancient Nile. Now the wind grows lighter. The stars shine softly overhead. The river continues its endless journey into the quiet darkness. And the ancient world, calm and unhurried, slowly fades into silence, leaving only the gentle sound of flowing water, and the peaceful feeling of another night beside the timeless Nile.